bit of a late alive if you're in my local time zone, but I just finished writing my ebook on, the 7 laws of body transformation, and in that really talks a lot about motivation and so on. And so in that I sort of revisited some research that I'd done ages ago, and yes, there's some fascinating insights, and I thought I'd share one of them. So one of the laws around motivation is to really find your meaning. And why is that important? Well, I guess if you want to live a long, healthy and productive life, then one of the keys is to really find your passion. And this passion, of course, is your personal reason for being. And the reason that's important is because it will help support you through the good times and bad. So when you find, that passion or that deep reason or your purpose, I guess, it's really important because it will help you to keep going when the going gets tough and to take challenges in the face of fear, right? So if you're trying to make some lifestyle changes, or if you're trying to smash out a goal or anything like that, your reason becomes basically that fire in the belly that keeps you going when things get tough. Now, one of the things that I got to revisit, and I'd completely forgotten about this, and you'll have to excuse my poor Japanese pronunciation, but yeah, there's a culture based in the Japanese archipelago called the Okinawans, and they have a very wise word, or local colloquialism, which I guess has been adopted more broadly, and that word is Ikigai. So you might have come across Ikigai if you've ever seen any of the stuff that Dan Buettner, I think that's how you pronounce his name. Anyway, he's like a famous cyclist, right? / researcher, multiple award-winning guy on multiple fronts, I guess. And he did a lot of research in what's called the Blue Zone, which is, as I mentioned, the archipelago and sort of where Japanese archipelago. And in this area, right, you've got people who live like extraordinarily long, healthy lives. I don't know if it's extraordinarily, but they live a lot longer than a lot of the Western counterparts in other places in the world. And so in this Blue Zone, they basically have the longest disability-free life expectancy. And here, men and women typically live over 100 years old, which is pretty phenomenal. But the fascinating thing about that is that they're not only living to past 100 years old, they're actually still physically capable, they're fully alert and involved in the world around them. They still work in their gardens, they play with their great-grandchildren, or maybe great-great-grandchildren, I don't know how frequently they produce over there. And when they die, it's generally, quite quickly, as in there's no suffering. It might be in their sleep. Sometimes it might be after they've gotten a bit jiggy with it. And their rates of disease typically are many times lower than that throughout much of the rest of the world, right? Interesting as well, the Okinawans don't actually have a word for retirement. But as I mentioned, they do have this word Ikigai. And that sort of roughly translates for reason for being, or reason for living, or passion, right? And Dan, cyclist Dan, and I think you can catch more in his 2009 TED Talk, so I am obviously paraphrasing rudimentarily, kind of trying to explain these concepts, so you might want to go and check that TED Talk out yourself. So when the Okinawans were actually interviewed as part of this research, right, they were asked to identify their Ikigai, and most of them, pretty much all of them, were able to identify that without any hesitation. And so some of the examples that were quoted were, a 102-year-old karate master whose, Ikigai was to teach his martial arts. For a 100-year-old fisherman, it was simply just bringing fish back to his family 3 days a week. And for a 102-year-old woman, it was spending time with her great-great-granddaughter as her reason for living. So, it's those reasons for living are as diverse as we are, and they were very personal reasons, right? So I guess the thing is then when we translate that back to, well, why did you get out of bed this morning? To me, I had to get out of bed. Well, I didn't have to, it was still a choice, right? Anyway, yes, that's one thought. So just hang that in your mind for the moment. The other interesting fact that I was reminded of, actually this is a new one that I didn't know, is, and I don't know why, maybe it's the new glasses, but I thought I'd get into a bit of word history, as you do. Went down a bit of a rabbit hole. Anyway, the word passion actually comes from the Latin verb patior, I think, or pator. Look, I don't know how to speak Latin, so that pronunciation is probably way off. Forgive me there. But basically, however you pronounce that word, it basically means to suffer and endure. And I don't know, maybe that's like where stories like the Passion of the Christ or that kind of term gets coined. But anyway, the whole idea is that passion is actually associated with suffering, which is quite interesting. But it's not actually the suffering so much that's associated with, right? It's around what sustains the sufferer. So it's whatever drives a person to keep going, even in the face of pain or deprivation, or, if you live in Australia, probably just minor discomfort, providing you're not going through something deeply personal and challenging, right? And then the other third point, I guess, is, as I went down this rabbit hole, was I was reminded around one of my favourite books, which I revisited as well. I love this book because, one, it's very profound. I get something different from it each time. It takes like literally a couple of hours. I've dog-eared just about every page in the book, which kind of seems pointless. Audio version is great as well if you've got some cardio or to get through as well. But basically, yeah, so the book, maybe if I just hold it, you can actually see, is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And this was, Viktor Frankl was a psychologist who, I guess through his suffering actually, and unintentionally was kind of a consequence of, developed a new style of therapy called Logotherapy. But before we get to that, so for those who haven't read or haven't heard of Viktor Frankl before, Viktor Frankl in his book kind of describes his life as a prisoner in 2 different concentration camps during the Holocaust. So yes, there's some quite harrowing stuff in the book. But what he endured and what he learned in those settings, gave way to an important school of thought or therapy, which is called logotherapy. And apparently, a bit more wordsmithing in history for you as well. Logotherapy comes from the Greek word logos, which apparently means, or translates roughly to meaning, right? And so there's 3 principles to logotherapy. And one is that life has meaning under all circumstances, so even the most miserable and harrowing ones, right? The second one is that he sort of argued that our primary motivation for living as human beings is our will to find meaning in life. So the fact that we do assign meaning to things is because, deep down we all want to find that we all want that association that our life was meaningful. And the third principle, which is the most important one, is that regardless of the situation, right, we all have the freedom to find meaning in what we do and even in what we experience, or at the very least in the stand we take when faced with a situation of unchangeable suffering. So the other thing that's really interesting as well is that one of the observations I picked up in the book was that it seemed that we're not talking about the gas chamber stuff, and sorry, this is a bit of a heavy topic, but in terms of the other harrowing conditions, there was quite a lot of people who obviously died from just simply starvation or being frozen to death, worked to the bone, illness, typhoid and cholera and all those sorts of things that went through the camps regularly. And then some people simply just lost the will to live and so on. So one of the subtle themes in the book as well is that those who did have a deeper reason for meaning tended to be more resilient, not only emotionally and mentally, but also physically as well. And so their survivability potentially, outside of other things that are outside of their control, they're more likely to make it through. Now, that could have been, I don't know if that was, sort of my interpretation of some of the events, or maybe, a way of Victor kind of subtly getting through his own survivor guilt to a degree through that experience, but still very insightful. So yeah, if you're looking for a good read, this is definitely one that will help you get there. Interestingly enough as well, Victor talks about his reason for how he managed to get through, and in his lowest points, it was actually the love of his wife and the hope that he would see her again. So he talks about a particularly low moment when he was really kind of at his wit's end, and then the sun came up, and it was a very beautiful sunrise, or sunset, it might have been actually. Anyway, either end, where the sun in the beautiful colours, and he was able to recall a very vivid and emotional memory and recollection of his wife and what he wanted to do to be able to see her again, and that got him through. So, anyway, my point being is that if you're finding yourself really struggling this winter, or just you're struggling to adjust to a new plan or anything like that, then one of the keys is to really take a moment to think about what is your deeper reason, what do you want to actually do, and how do you, because then everything else becomes easier, right? You connect everything that you need to do in terms of your goals to how that helps you fulfill that purpose or find that meaning. And so when you're having a minor inconvenience around, oh, I don't really want to do this right now, it's so hard to stick to this, when the motivation wanes, then it's around reconnecting, well, how does this get me closer to my goals, or how does this get me closer to, helping me feel like I'm living a life full of purpose, and so on. So it's not an easy question by any means, but it is a rewarding one. And when you can visualize where you want to be and why you're doing everything for, it does give you that extra little bit of tenacity to just keep going. So yeah, hopefully that was a little bit of Wednesday wisdom for you. Now, as I mentioned as well, I have actually completed my ebook, so if you'd like a copy of it, it's free, obviously, and thankfully I don't have to pronounce any foreign words in there, so you can just read them and not have to try and listen to my terrible butchering of beautiful languages. But yeah, anyway, if you would like a copy, just comment below or DM me, and I will shoot you across one. Alright, have a great Wednesday wherever you are in the world, and stay motivated.